Breaking news, a critical test in the criminal cases against two of President Trump's biggest political foes. A federal judge in Virginia just heard arguments in a bid from James Comey and Letitia James to disqualify prosecutor Lindsay Halligan. Their attorneys argue Halligan was handpicked by President Trump and is serving as interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia unlawfully.
And joining us now, CNN's crime and justice correspondent Caitlin Polans. Just getting out of the courtroom, Caitlin, you were inside, you listened to all those arguments. So what happened during the hearing?
Well, Wolf and Pam, I was listening very closely to how Judge Cameron McGowan Curry was going to handle this hearing. And she's a laid-back questioner, a very concise questioner. But boy, it was a grilling of the Justice Department if I have ever seen one before from a judge like this. What Judge Curry asked, her very last question of the the Justice Department, do you believe U.S. v. Trump was wrongly decided? That's a very telling question because the Trump defense team, when Donald Trump was a criminal defendant, he had won his case by having the prosecutor, Jack Smith, tossed off of it in Florida in a set of arguments very similar to this. And Judge Curry is now asking the Justice Department, are you guys against that now as the Justice Department wanting these cases against James Comey and Letitia James to go forward? The Justice Department lawyer responded, that's a different thing. That was a different situation that doesn't apply here. But that was quite a question that elicited gasps across the courtroom from a lot of people that were listening to this hearing. The other thing that Judge Curry did is she really dug in to some of the moves the Attorney General had made in this case to stand up and back Lindsay Halligan, the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. attorney, who's there sent by Donald Trump on an interim basis. The bigger picture of this case is about, has it been too long without a Senate-confirmed person in this job? Judge Curry asked some questions of that, but she had even more questions for the Justice Department, even a back and forth on whether or not it was needed for the Attorney General to send an order into court. And she pointed out that the Attorney General said in a statement to the court, in an order she signed on October 31st, she had read all of the grand jury transcripts in this case. The judge went back and forth with that Justice Department attorney saying that's not even possible, and some of them are missing. Wolf and Pam. Oh, one more thing. She's going to be ruling by Thanksgiving, so a judge acting very quickly here. Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much. Caitlin Polans. Let's bring in former federal prosecutor Elise Adamson. So, Elise, you heard Caitlin really lay it out there. Comey's attorney argued the case against the former FBI director suffers from a, quote, fundamental defect. Can you explain that argument?
Yes. So what Comey and James are arguing is that Lindsay Halligan was never lawfully appointed and that she lacked the authority to bring the indictments in the first place, that, essentially a private citizen walked into the grand jury and returned these indictments. And thus, they can't proceed. They simply can't proceed because they weren't properly brought. I think an interesting distinguishing factor between James and Comey is that the statute of limitations has now run on James Comey's cases. So if the judge rules in James and Comey's favor and ultimately agrees that Halligan was unlawfully appointed and dismisses the case, it is likely that the Comey case won't come back, although Letitia James's case has not exceeded the statute of limitations, and they could just appoint a new prosecutor to bring the case back.
Elise Adamson, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you for that context. We appreciate it.
The high-stakes hearing concerning Lindsay Halligan. She's the interim U.S. attorney handpicked by President Trump to prosecute the cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Attorneys for both say Halligan is not lawfully serving in her post and that the charges against their clients should be dropped. The hearing, of course, a crucial test for the criminal cases against two of the people President Trump has demanded DOJ target. The judge says she will be making her decision in this case before Thanksgiving. Let's break down today's developments, though, with CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York and a former federal prosecutor. Ellie, it is always good to have you here on days like this when we need to kind of sort through what exactly things mean. James's attorney arguing Halligan is unlawfully serving in her post. They're trying to make the case, in his words, she's pretending. Help us understand their argument here.
Well, Jess, that's a colorful way of arguing that Lindsay Halligan was not properly appointed as U.S. attorney. So ordinarily, we get our U.S. attorneys through a presidential nomination and then Senate confirmation. If that has not happened, however, federal law says the attorney general can then install a temporary U.S. attorney for 120 days. Once that 120 days is over, then it's up to the federal judges in that district. Now, that all happened here in Virginia. A man named Eric Siebert was put in place, did his 120 days, and then the judges said, you can stay as the temporary U.S. attorney. However, he then resigned under pressure arising from these cases, actually, and was replaced by Lindsay Halligan. So the argument that James and Comey are making now is the attorney general and the president cannot just keep appointing one person after another to 120 days, then another 120 days, then another 120 days. Therefore, they argue Lindsay Halligan is not appropriately serving as U.S. attorney. Therefore, they argue the indictment should be thrown out.
Is this the hearing that could cause President Trump's crusade against James Comey and Letitia James to unravel? Well, today, lawyers for the former FBI director and New York Attorney General asked a court to disqualify the Trump loyalists who brought charges against them in separate cases. They argue that Lindsay Halligan was illegally appointed after the prior prosecutor resigned under pressure for arguing the evidence wasn't there to charge Comey and James. Her appointment also came 2 days after President Trump floated her for the role in a Truth Social post, urging the DOJ to charge Comey, James, and other political enemies. Joining us now, MSNBC's Lisa Rubin, reporting from Alexandria, Virginia. Brendan Ballou, former federal prosecutor and former lawyer with the DOJ National Security Division. Anthony Coley is former director of the Office of Public Affairs at the Biden DOJ and an MSNBC political analyst. So, Lisa, give us the update, what happened in court today, and when might we get a ruling?
So Judge Curry, Chris, who heard the arguments today, is a judge from the District of South Carolina. Of course, she was plucked by the chief judge of the Fourth Circuit, that's the federal appeals court here, to hear this argument, because one of the issues here is whether the president and the attorney general overstepped their authority by installing Lindsay Halligan in her role as an interim U.S. attorney. The government's argument is that every time there's a vacancy, that they have 120 days to appoint an interim U.S. attorney, and that they can essentially recycle those 120 days again and again and again through different appointments by the attorney general. The attorneys for Tish James and Jim Comey argued that can't possibly be true, because if it were true, that would usurp the constitutional roles in our system that are supposed to be played by the president in nominating inferior officers like U.S. attorneys and the Senate in confirming them. Judge Curry sort of had what I'd call a stone face today, not really giving very much in terms of her reaction to the arguments, but she signaled a couple of things. One, she's going to rule before Thanksgiving. That's important because the next stage of both of these cases happens after that. And if she were to decide that Lindsay Halligan's appointment here is invalid and that the indictments have to be dismissed, she would be saving everyone involved a lot of work before they come back to court and argue their next motions on vindictive and selective prosecution. But the other thing that I think is particularly notable, my colleague Fallon Gallagher noted that her last question to the government was whether they believed that Judge Cannon's opinion dismissing the case against President Trump on the grounds that special counsel Jack Smith was unlawfully appointed, whether that should essentially control here. And she was implying that if Jack Smith couldn't maintain his role as special counsel because, like Lindsay Halligan, he was not nominated by a president, confirmed by the Senate, then should the results here be any different? Chris?
All right. So, Brendan, what did you make of the arguments today? And do you think there is strength to the case to say that she should not be there, Lindsay Halligan?
Absolutely. And I think it's important for your viewers to understand that this 120-day limit isn't some sort of technical or sort of procedural requirement. It really goes to the heart of what the Department of Justice and what U.S. attorneys are supposed to be about.
Comey and Letitia James, I think, are striking at the right moment. Trump is clearly distracted and his movement is shambling and crumbling right now as the new releases, the new emails have exposed him, and that he knew more than he let on, and that he seemed to be at least traveling in the same circles as Jeff, not just broadly, but specifically when he was doing some, maybe, of his dirty deeds. And you have MAGA in a civil war right now. And so James and Comey are firing in at the right moment to hit MAGA when they're splintered. And they're doing it in a way that ties into this broader discussion of threats, of political prosecution, of selective prosecution. And I think that it's really well done. I think they have this trial might be over before it begins, because there's two questions here. There's the three questions, really. Is the person who brought the charges even qualified to bring them? And does that invalidate the case? That's one thing. Two, was there information given to the grand jury that was effectively designed to mislead the grand jury? And then also, you got to make the argument around the selective prosecution. And in addition to all of that, even if the trial does ultimately go ahead after these three brilliant moves, because sometimes the cases will go ahead. Judges are sometimes reluctant to throw cases out because they want to let the process play out. There's no actual case here. There's not enough evidence in either of these cases, right? We got to make that clear. It's not, somebody did something illegal, but then there's a debate about, well, were their rights violated? Well, was the prosecution, did they hide evidence? The person might ultimately be guilty, but if the prosecution still plays dirty in the process, it could invalidate the case, right? Further to that, somebody could do something wrong, but it still be selective prosecution. I mean, I don't think that's what happened to Trump, but that's what Trump certainly argued. In a lot of his cases, do you notice how he argued less that he actually didn't commit a crime and more that, sure, I might have done it, but everybody does it, right? We're not talking about something like that here. They look innocent. The process looks rigged, and Donald Trump is too distracted to fight back.